Hello class, welcome to Macroeconomics Lesson 7. You might remember this is the set of lessons on economic performance, and I'm happy to report that we are now in number 6, the inequality measure. So since we're at the end of all these metrics, I thought you might enjoy this cartoon. Dilbert is absolutely the best cartoon strip about business that there ever was, and I'm a big fan. Hope you like this one. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to measure inequality now. Inequality is usually measured, in fact almost exclusively measured, with the Lorenz curve that was proposed about 100 years ago. It measures income inequality nowadays, but in the past it's measured other things. You might see it where it's measured wealth inequality. When I first studied the Lorenz curve long ago when I was in graduate school, it was used to measure market share inequality. In those days it was thought that if there were big firms and little firms competing with each other, that was a really bad thing. This is an astoundingly bad idea that was very common when I was in graduate school, and thankfully it's faded away. Then I also saw an obscure paper about job safety inequality. Turns out that men accept a lot more risky jobs than women do, and the person that wrote this article, I think, was just pushing back a little bit on income inequality between men and women. I don't know if how great the paper was, but it was interesting to see the Lorenz curve applied in an entirely different way. So the Lorenz curve, of course, is a graph, and there was another guy that came afterwards. His name was Gini, and he created an index, which is a numerical summation of what the Lorenz curve describes. So in the Lorenz curve you need a graph to see what's going on, but with the Gini index you can just look at this number. But they are related together, and we'll cover them both. Alright, so I've collected a few cartoons to make a very simple point. You might notice that whenever income inequality is discussed, there's always a villain. There's victims and a villain. So like this guy, this rich guy over here, is obviously undeserving, he's uncaring, and these people, he's just going to step off of here with his big heavy wheelbarrow of money, and they're going to fall to their deaths probably. And in this case we got this rich, they call them fat cats. This guy is like really heavy. In fact, the rich people are almost always drawn out as really fat. He's got the drink of rich people, or martini, I think. And now this guy, evidently an accountant, is saying, hey, the gap between rich and poor is not as great as we thought. It's really a funny cartoon. I don't know how true it is. Then this one is yeah, so another one. Here's this big fat guy. You know, maybe he's consuming all the world's resources. I'm not quite sure. And then this sign of rich and poor and the middle class in this bucket. It turns out that inequality is a measurable thing, and most people will just assume without measurement. They'll repeat things that they hear, like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's not actually true. The rich are getting richer, that's certainly true, but the poor are getting richer too. And it is a measurable thing, although it's difficult to do, but it is measurable to see who's getting richer faster. You can see statistics going one way or the other, and it really depends on what you count and what you don't count, which is a very similar problem to the other metrics that we've looked at in macroeconomics. Okay, so why measure income inequality? First of all, consider who says inequality is important. It's not a given that it is. Certainly equality in the eyes of the law is very important, and I think we would all, no matter how we feel about other things, we would all share common ground here that equality in the eyes of the law is really important. But equality of outcomes is a much more controversial thing. There would be some people who think that's important and others that think it's not. People have different values, differing values for income and leisure is just one reason why income inequality might exist. For example, if you're like a really motivated business person, now that I've finished these slides, I'm not too happy with what I've picked here, but you have a CEO or a CFO or somebody in top management who's really sacrificed a lot, worked long, hard hours, and moved all over the place to take one promotion over another, all in the focus maybe of this, or this is how they get compensated for that. But there'd be other people, like maybe a college professor, like maybe me, who might choose more leisure time and less income. I'll never forget that my favorite economics professor from undergraduate school was actually quite disappointed when I busted into his office, all excited to explain to him that I'd been accepted into graduate school in economics, because he thought my future was here. He thought, "No, man, college professors don't make any money. You should be here." So his focus was here, and mine was somewhere else. Another problem is that you have differing values for different types of work. So, for example, do you think moving often would be a detriment to work, and you might pick a career that doesn't require you to move so much? Or maybe you prefer stability, so you want a job that's going to be around a long time, where somebody else might take a more risky job but whose payout is better. Or maybe your work environment is important to you, like you want to work inside where it's comfortable, maybe in an office, and have colleagues that you like around you, where somebody else might say, "No, I don't care about that. I don't mind working outside some as long as the income is good." Or maybe you want to pick a job that has good opportunity for advancement, so you might be willing to accept a job with low pay at the early years of your career because you want to build up work experience, improve yourself, and seek advancement later. These are all reasonable things that people might disagree about, right, on what seems important to you and what seems important to me. And depending on how you decide these things, it's going to create different income streams for you. Another one is people have different preferences for risk. So some people, they actually like risk. So think about every high school kid who maybe scored a touchdown or won a basketball game or got a birdie on the last hole on some golf course someplace on some high school team, and they immediately dream about, hey, someday I could be a professional athlete and make millions and millions of dollars. But the truth is that almost none of them do. The probability of success in that career is very, very small. But who am I to tell each of them that no, you can't do that, that instead you must become a dentist or you must be, become something. Similarly, actors is another one. Every kid that starred in some high school play probably dreams of someday being a multi-million-dollar type A actor. But the truth is, very, very few make it there, and the rest fall away. It's a high-risk profession. Another one where it might be some of you now, and I'm not trying to discourage you in any way, but many of you have dreams of being entrepreneurs, and that's a very risky profession. Some entrepreneurs are successful, they make a lot of money, and others are not. Or maybe they are unsuccessful for a long time before they finally achieve success. So people have different preferences for risk. In my own case, I don't like risk too much, but you could be different. People have differing time discount preferences. So, for example, it might be that you're looking for a job where you can get some training, maybe in an associate's degree. So you train for 2 years and you get an associate's degree in some professional trade, and off you go, making pretty good money after 2 years. But you'll never make really big money that somebody else might make who trains longer. Then the next level might be a baccalaureate degree. So you work now 4 years. So basically you work 4 years without income or for little income as you focus on your training. And then you take a job that could be that first job income is really not that high as you work and gain job experience and get promoted. Or maybe you even stay in school even longer and you go to graduate school. Or maybe you do postdoc work. My own experience is a good example. I was 30 years old before I finished my formal training, And in those early years, my income was very, very low, probably qualified for all kinds of assistance. But I wasn't really poor in the sense of a person who has no hope about the future. I know a young cardiologist who trained until he was 37. His income was pretty low, but now after his training is over, his income is higher. So how do we evaluate these things? Is that bad that they did that? Because it certainly reflects an income inequality. Okay, so these are just some of the reasons that we might have income inequality. But the truth is, while all of those reasons may be good, or maybe you just think some of them are good and you think the others are bogus, it doesn't matter. No matter how you feel, whether they're good or bad, if you are really truly concerned and passionately concerned about inequality, those reasons on that previous slide won't persuade you that income inequality is an okay thing. So there's a few other things besides the reasons that might explain it that you might take pause and consider. Why yield on the premise that capitalism causes increasing inequality? Actually, I don't like this word capitalism. It's a derogatory term that was coined by Karl Marx. It doesn't even describe really what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is a system of voluntary exchange where people are free to trade between each other. So why yield on the premise that a system of voluntary exchange causes increasing inequality? I'm not sure that's true. You think systems that don't allow for voluntary exchange would be more equal? I don't think so. You could just look at the former Soviet Union or current Venezuela, or if you could get the data, look at North Korea or maybe Cuba. There are people who are very wealthy there, usually friends of the government, and others who are in abject poverty. I don't think it's true, really, that a system of voluntary exchange causes more inequality than some other system. Another approach is to demonstrate or explain how inequality is measured, and we're going to do that in a couple of slides. Finally, there are other ways to measure inequality besides the Lorenz curve, and they are difficult to gather the data, and that's probably why we don't use them, but there are other ways. Okay, so let's begin with the Lorenz curve. So the Lorenz curve is just a graph, and now on the x-axis, let's just put the percent of a group. So in the case of income inequality, since the best income data we have comes from the Internal Revenue Service, this grouping down here is usually households. But it could be anything. Way back when I was in graduate school, the percent of the group was the percent of firms, right? Because they were looking at market share. And on this axis over here, we have the percent of some variable that we're interested in. So in modern times, since the Lorenz curve is mostly used to measure income inequality, this axis over here would be percent of income. But back when I was studying it, way back in those days, it was the percent of market share. But it could be anything. The Lorenz curve is just a tool that can be used to measure any kind of inequality. Alright, so since they're both in percent, they range from 0 to 100%. There's no values above that. And so you could kind of box this off. And sometimes the Lorenz curve is presented as a box instead of as a graph. So you can do it either way. Now, if it turned out that the income, if we're doing income inequality, is exactly the same all along all groups, then it would be that 10% of the people, here let me find my mouse, 10% of the people would have 10% of all the income, 20% of all the people would have 20% of all the income, and so forth. So this 45-degree line that would start at 0, 0 and would end at 100%, 100%, that's called the line of equality. Of course, in the real world, that's not really true. Some people make more money than others. So what we do is, in the Lorenz curve, is we sort all these groups from the lowest income earners to the richest income earners. So this is the bottom 10% of income earners, the bottom 20% of income earners, the bottom 40%, the bottom 80%, and while it sounds a little weird to say it, this point over here is the bottom 100% of all the income earners, so that would be everybody. So then when you plot that out, you get this curved line, which is called the Lorenz curve. And this line maps out inequality. So if you look at this thing, the way I have it drawn is quite profound. The bottom 40% of all the people only have something like 8% of all the income. Can you see that? The bottom 60% of all the people only have something like, I don't know, 22, 23% of all the income, and so forth. Okay, so this is a Lorenz curve. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to change this to income. So the way I have it set up here is just generic. It could be a Lorenz curve for anything. So let's change this now to percent of households, right? Because that's the kind of data we get from the Internal Revenue Service, and percent of income. Here we go. So if it turned out that income was a little more equal, the Lorenz curve would be in here closer and closer and closer to the line of equality, right? So as the Lorenz curve gets flatter and flatter and flatter and approaches this, things become more and more equal. Going the other way, if the Lorenz curve gets more and more bowed out, things are less and less equal. Now this is a good time to point out to you a big problem with the Lorenz curve, and that is the slope of this Lorenz curve is very, very sensitive to how you define these households. So for example, if you have a family of 4, and let's see, this is an intact family, so there's a husband and a wife and they're both working, right? The household will look kind of wealthy because you got 2 incomes in there. And so then if they divorce, right, then we have now 2 households and their income is much smaller. So because of households, because of how the data comes to us from the Internal Revenue Service, it greatly or significantly affects how much inequality we see. Here's another way of thinking about it. Suppose you graduated but you got a job and it has a great future, but income is kind of low at the moment and you got student loans to pay off. So you decide to room with 2 other people. So you are technically a household, at least by the way the data is collected. So you got 3 income earners in an apartment someplace. And let's say that your income begins to creep up. So maybe you started at $25,000, then you were making $30,000, then $40,000, then $50,000, then $60,000. So little by little your income begins to go up. Eventually you will decide to move out and get your own place. Now when that happens, when you move out, what will happen to the Lorenz curve? I hope you can see that when you move out, which would be a good thing, you'd be excited about it, the Lorenz curve would show more inequality because you would suddenly, that is the household that you represent, would have much less income than the household you came out of. Alright, so let's continue. So how do we get to this Gini index? Remember this number that summarizes the Lorenz curve. The way we do it is we consider this space in here, and Professor Gini proposed that we measure this area in here, and he called it area A, and then this area over here under the Lorenz curve he called area B, right? So now think about this a second. When incomes are really, really equal, area A will be kind of tiny and area B will be very large. On the other hand, when incomes are very, very unequal, that Lorenz curve will go way out like this. Area A will be quite large, and area B will be very, very small. So Professor Gini proposed the Gini index would be the ratio area A divided by A plus B. So when there is a lot of equality, A, this number A will be very, very small, and the Gini index will approach 0, right? So as the Lorenz curve crowds to the line of equality, area A will go to 0, 0 divided by anything would be 0. On the other hand, if there's lots and lots of inequality, area A will get very, very big, area B will go close to 0, and so then it'll be A divided by A plus 0. The Gini index will go to 1. So the Gini index ranges from 0 to 1, where 0 would represent equality and 1 would represent extreme inequality. Alright, so that's the Lorenz curve and the Gini index. Now let's summarize what we've covered. Unlike poverty, inequality is not prima facie a bad thing. Some people think it's a bad thing and others do not. There are many reasons that someone may choose a desirable job characteristic over income, and we listed many of those in an earlier slide. And if they choose those characteristics, their income will be less. Lorenz curves are also very sensitive to the definition of the group. It would actually be better to calculate Lorenz curves for each individual instead of Lorenz curves for households, in my opinion. Lorenz curves are a static measure of inequality, static meaning that they are a snapshot in time. They can't account for people who are training. So consider your own situation. Some of you probably are working hard to achieve some academic degree, right? And in the meantime, your employment is suffering. Maybe you're working only part-time, or you're not taking a promotion that you might have taken otherwise because you need to focus on your studies. And so in those years, your income is lower than it would be otherwise. And later, once your degree is completed, your income will be higher. The Lorenz curve can't pick up on any of that. The Lorenz curve can't see that when I was in graduate school, I had a bright future. But at the moment that I was in graduate school, my income was really low. To a Lorenz curve, a person who is in poverty and has really a bleak future and they'll probably be in poverty all their lives, a Lorenz curve treats that person the same as it would treat somebody who was studying hard in law school or in medical school or in any kind of graduate program. There are more robust measures of inequality, but they are difficult to gather the data. In my opinion, the best measure of inequality, if you wanted to do that, would be to figure out the discounted present value of lifetime income. That's the smartest way to do it, but that kind of data is really hard to come by. I give you this formula because this is what you would need to do. The discounted present value of your future income stream would be simply your income from every year during your working life, so I just set it from 18 to 68, your income for every year, divided by some discount rate, which would be 1 plus the interest rate raised to how many years out past 18 you were. So this is how you would do it, but again, to my knowledge, the only person that might have data like that would be the Social Security Administration, and I'm sure they wouldn't give it all to you, but you might could ask them for a random sample of, say, 10,000, a random sample of 10,000 people who had paid into the Social Security Administration. It might give you a good idea of what income inequality looks like across a lifetime. Okay, so this is the last metric. Inequality is the last metric, and we are now done with these measures of the economy. All right, see ya.